Hey American History 1 students, if you would like to follow along with me, I'll read the passage to you and then you can answer the 3 questions at the end, or you can click off now and you can read on your own and still answer the 3 questions at the end in a Canvas text box entry. So let's get started. This is the primary source, the Underground Railroad. In this passage from his Reminiscences in 1880, abolitionist Levi Coffin describes how the Underground Railroad operated. According to Coffin, what were some of the risks of helping slaves escape to freedom? I was personally acquainted with all the active and reliable workers on the Underground Railroad in the city, Cincinnati, Ohio, both colored and white. There were a few wise and careful managers among the colored people, but it was not safe to trust all of them with the affairs of our work. Most of them were too careless, and a few were unworthy. They could be bribed by the slave hunters to betray the hiding places of the fugitives. Soon we found it to be the best policy to continue our affairs to a few persons and let the whereabouts of the slaves be known to as few people as possible. When slave hunters were prowling around the city, we found it necessary to use every precaution. We were soon fully initiated into the management of the Underground Railroad matters in Cincinnati and did not lack for work. Our willingness to aid the slaves was soon known, and hardly a fugitive came to the city without applying to us for assistance. There seemed to be a continual increase in runaways, and such was the vigilance of the pursuers that I was obliged to devote a large share of my time from my business to making arrangements for their concealment and safe conveyance of the fugitives. They sometimes came to our door frightened and panting and in a destitute condition, having fled in such haste and fear that they had no time to bring any clothing except what they had on, and that was often very scant. The expense of providing suitable clothing for them when it was necessary for them to go on immediately, or of feeding them when they were obliged to be concealed for days or for weeks, was very heavy. Added to this was the cost of hiring teams of a party of fugitives had to be conveyed out of the city by night to some Underground Railroad depot, from 20 to 30 miles distant. The price for a 2-horse team on such occasions was generally $10, and sometimes 2 or 3 teams were required. It was necessary to use every precaution, and I thought it wise to act as the monkey did, take the cat's paw to draw the chestnut from the fire, and not burn my own fingers. Generally, I gave the money to a second person to hand to the colored man. We had several trusty colored men who owned no property and who could lose nothing in a prosecution, who understood Underground Railroad matters, and we generally got them to act as drivers. But in some instances, white men volunteered to drive, generally young and able-bodied. Sometimes the depot to which the fugitives were consigned was not reached until several hours after daylight, and it required a person of pluck and nerve to conduct them to their stopping place. If the party of fugitives were large, they were soon scattered among the abolitionists in the neighborhood and remained in safe concealment until the next night. Our house was large and well adapted for secreting fugitives. Very often, slaves would lie concealed in upper chambers for weeks without the boarders or frequent visitors at the house knowing anything about it. My wife had a quiet, unconcerned way of going about her work as if nothing unusual was on hand, which was calculated to lull every suspicion of those who might be watching, and who would have been at once aroused by any sign of secrecy or mystery. Even the intimate friends of the family did not know when there were slaves hidden in the house, unless they were directly informed. The fugitives generally arrived in the night and were secreted among the friendly colored people or hidden in the upper room of our house. They came alone or in companies, and in a few instances had a white guide to direct them. So from this excerpt of Levi or Levi Coffin's Reminiscences, there are 3 discussion questions at the bottom I'd like for you to answer in the text box entry in Canvas. You can just number those answers and you don't have to rewrite the questions. Number 1, what were some of the risks involved in helping slaves escape to freedom? Number 2, according to this excerpt, what was the role of a conductor on the Underground Railroad? And number 3, based on your reading of this excerpt, weigh the pros and cons of being an Underground Railroad conductor like Levi Coffin. I'll see you in the next assignment.